Good morning, everyone. Welcome to beginning a Hispanic ministry at your parish. My name is Pedro Rubalcava. And before we get started, I just want to remind you that it's a very good idea that if you have any programs or applications running in your computer or iPad or other device that you're using, if you turn those off and just keep GoToMeeting on, you'll have a better experience viewing and sound quality. And also you'll notice, if you're not aware of it, usually on your right hand side there's a control panel, and you can type in questions at any time, and then we'll have a time at the end of the session where we'll answer those questions live. And if we don't get to them, don't worry, we'll provide the answers for you in some way, shape, or form. So let's begin with a prayer. And this prayer is actually taken from the fifth encuentro process that the U.S. bishops have asked the church in the U.S. to be a part of. And if you're not familiar with it, I'll be able to tell you a little bit about it in a little bit. But pray with me first. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of infinite mercy, you sent your risen Son to encounter the disciples on the way to Emmaus. Grant us today a missionary spirit and send us forth to encounter our sisters and brothers, to walk with them in friendship, to listen to their hopes and dreams with compassion, and to proclaim your word with courage, so that they might come to know you once again in the breaking of the bread. Make us all missionary disciples, and stay with us always as we seek to share the joy of the gospel with people of all generations from every race, language, culture, and nation. We ask you this with burning hearts, filled with the Holy Spirit, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and through the loving intercession of our Blessed Mother Mary, Our Lady of Guadalupe, star of the new evangelization in the Americas. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen. My name is Pedro Rubalcava, and I am currently the Director of Music Development and Outreach at OCP. And I've been involved here at this building at OCP now for going on 16 years. And it's been a pleasure to be able to serve you. Formerly, I was Director of Hispanic Ministry. And I also serve on several boards, national boards, one of them being the Instituto Nacional Hispano de Liturgia, which is the National Institute for Hispanic Liturgy, National Hispanic Institute for Liturgy, I should say. And also I'm on the board of the National Catholic Council for Hispanic Ministry, CCHM, and I also serve on the regional board for the Northwest Regional Office for Hispanic Ministry. And recently I've been one of the co-chairs for the National Fifth Encuentro. And as I mentioned to you earlier, the Fifth Encuentro is happening. You might be familiar with it, but it's a process of evangelization. It's a process of consultation that the U.S. bishops have called the church in the U.S. to be a part of, to enter into this process of trying to develop new Hispanic leadership for the whole church is one of the aims, but also to look at the reality of the church in the U.S. And here's what we will be talking about. Here's our outline. We'll be talking a little bit about Hispanic ministry in general, and we're going to talk about how you prepare to begin in Hispanic ministry at your parish. We'll do a little bit about language, culture, and spirituality, and we'll talk about beginning a Mass in Spanish at your parish, but also look at the various ministries that you might want to consider, not only in liturgical ministries, but even beyond that, to serve the your efforts in Hispanic ministry. So here's a little bit about why you might want to consider Hispanic ministry. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. The church has really grown with regard to many of the, what we call, excuse me, boy, minorities in the Catholic Church here in the U.S. Currently, we say that there's about 40% of the church is Hispanic, the church in the U.S. And something interesting, just as far as numbers go, outside of the U.S., the largest concentration of Hispanics really is in Mexico. So that's saying a lot. We have immigrants and then successive generations of those immigrants of Latinos from throughout different countries in the Americas and the Caribbean, and even in Spain, Hispanics that have formed this large number of Hispanics here in the U.S. One of the things that we find is that the majority of Catholics under 30 years of age are Hispanic. And Hispanics tend to have larger families than the prevailing culture, and so you're going to see that they'll grow, and that's even though we have millennials that are nuns, N-O-N-E-S, perhaps you've heard about that. Because of the larger families, then the church continues to grow in its Hispanic ranks. 54% of U.S. millennial Catholics are Hispanic. That's a very large number. 37 million U.S. Hispanics. That's about 75% of Hispanics. 5 and older speak Spanish at home. And more than half of these speak English very well. So even though we have a lot of people speaking English at homes, as well as Spanish, one of the things that makes it important to have a Mass in Spanish, perhaps in your parish that has a significant number of Hispanics, is because the prayer that they receive at home, the instruction, religious instruction, informal as it may be, the experience of God in their homes is done in Spanish. And so I've across the years, over the years, I've encountered young people. I've been part of panels on campus ministry with Hispanics, and I'll ask the question, how many of you young people here know the prayers of the Mass in English? And very few of them will raise their hand. And so their experience of liturgy, their experience of prayer, their experience of God is in Spanish. And Spanish plays a large part of the cultural expression. So something to consider. 4,800 of the U.S. parishes currently, according to the USCCB website, have Hispanic ministry. And minimally, I believe this means having a Mass in Spanish, one Mass in Spanish. And since the Fifth Encuentro process began a couple of years ago, it appears that we have added 280 more parishes that have begun Hispanic ministry. And those numbers are impressive. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we look at how we serve then this large group of Hispanics in the U.S. Church. Obviously, many of them will be coming to your parish that speak English very well and will be coming to English Masses. But a large number of them will be going to other places that currently have a Spanish Mass, or even going to other denominations that frequently advertise Misa en Español. So you want to make sure you keep tabs on that. And one of the things about preparing for to begin Hispanic ministry at your parish is to look at gathering people in your communities that would be important to have in the conversation. So form a community of parishioners, which include parish staff, liturgical leadership, catechetical ministries, RCIA coordinators, and youth and young adult ministry, and form a core of Latino leadership within your community to be part of this committee to begin to talk about where do Hispanics live within our parish. Meet with the pastor and staff of parish who who of a local parish perhaps, who have experienced success in beginning Hispanic ministry and learn best practices from them. Also, something to consider is if your diocese has director of Hispanic ministry or multicultural ministry office or vicar for Hispanic ministry, find out what support they may be able to offer you, what resources they have. Something else to consider is the contact the USCCB Secretary for Diversity in the Catholic Church. You might want to go to the usccb.org website, and at the very bottom of the page you'll find a lot of hot links. One of them would be multicultural ministry or diversity in the Catholic Church, and if you click on that you'll see all the different groupings that they serve: Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, African Americans, etc. And so among those you'll find Hispanic ministry. Click on that and you'll see demographics, you'll see resources, you'll see all kinds of goodies that you can learn about Hispanic ministry. The other thing that you might consider, and this is just based on my experience many years ago when I used to work in the Diocese of San Diego, live and work in the Diocese of San Diego, a former priest friend of mine who was the rector at the seminary where I attended, called me and said, I need you to come and help me develop an Hispanic ministry here at the parish. And so one of the things that he says, I have a suspicion that we have a lot of people here, but I don't know quite how to find them, how to connect. And so I did go. The parish had some Hispanics there, but I began to go to the grocery stores, began to go to the Mexican restaurants. That's a kind of something to look at. If there are Mexican restaurants in the area, probably there are, or Latino restaurants for that matter. It doesn't have to be Mexican. In this instance, it was. And then I began to walk the neighborhoods and ask questions, and I found a large apartment complex where a lot of Latinos were living, and I began to engage, and we began to engage as a parish. And soon after that, it was decided that all of these different names and contacts that we were acquiring, we would begin with a Mass on the 12th of December, Our Lady of Guadalupe, and we put out the invitation out there, had flyers and postcards that went out at all the different stores and areas that people went out and fanned out, and we had over 400 people that came to our first Our Lady of Guadalupe celebration, and consequently, soon after that, we began a once a month Mass in Spanish, and it wasn't too long before the pastor says, no, we have to have this every week. And obviously with that comes then looking at catechetical ministry and other ministries, social ministries that develop in the parish. So something to consider that based on my experience, I'm sure other people have other experiences of how they went about deciding we need to begin this. So it's important to look at that and ask questions, not only of the parishioners, but also other people that have experiences in your area, in your diocese, about how they began. And it could be the case that there are people from neighboring parishes that really belong in your parish, but because you don't provide the services in your parish, they'll go other places. This is something that happened in my current parish here in St. Henry's in Gresham, is that a large number from a parish that was offering Hispanic ministry Masses in Spanish then came over to begin assisting Mass in Spanish at our parish because they lived in that vicinity. And that's really what you want to do. You want to really explore the richness and diversity that you have in your parish to be able to serve them. So we'll talk about now the importance of language, culture, and spirituality. Just so you know, the Latino community in the U.S. is multicultural. We have people that come from various parts of Latin America, South America, Mexico itself, Central America, the Caribbean. And everyone, even though they might speak Spanish, has unique cultural differences. So one of the things that you'll want to do is investigate where a majority of the Latino community in your parish originates from. You know, ask about countries of origin, ask about even, you know, regions within the country. My roots are in Mexico. My parents are both from Mexico, and I was born in the U.S. And so my father is from Jalisco, my mother is from Aguascalientes. And Aguascalientes, Jalisco, and Zacatecas, they're very similar in some regards. But then you go to the north part of Mexico and you see differences culturally, as if you were in the south part or on the eastern Gulf. And so take it into account that each of these, while they are similar in spirituality and devotional practice, there are particularities. For instance, what might be associated with patronal feasts that are celebrated and are important to the religious life and the development of spirituality within these communities, and they bring that with them. And there's a richness in that diversity and expression of faith. So you'll want to, in time, consider, you know, what can we do, what can these communities bring to offer to form this multicultural spirituality that we have on our parish. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And the other part is that, well, I mentioned earlier that a lot of people will speak English, and a lot of people, while they may be more comfortable in Spanish, or vice versa, comfortable in English, they'll still come to the Spanish Mass. And parents will bring their children and teenagers, they'll bring them to Mass, and they'll experience Mass in Spanish. And so when if they go to English Mass, it'll be a little foreign at times because they don't know the prayers, they don't know the songs. And so consider that. And even while the pastor or the associate pastor may not be expert in Spanish or comfortable reading or speaking Spanish, it's going to be important that they learn, or we all learn, greetings, simple greetings and phrases. You know, buenos dias, ¿cómo está? Mi nombre es, those kinds of things. And it goes a long way in developing relationships, and people really appreciate that, particularly the monolingual Spanish speakers. And also encourage other members from the parish that may not be Spanish speakers to encourage them to attend the Spanish Mass once you begin that, and make their presence known, and just to experience what the differences might be. And as you're preparing, maybe it's something that the team that you have formed will want to go visit other parishes that have Spanish Mass to experience that, what it might look like and what to expect. And the other thing is as you're developing ministries in your parish, you might consider inviting one of the local Spanish-speaking priests in your area to help you in presiding at Mass or preaching, especially if the pastor or the associate there are not Spanish speakers. And there are a lot of resources out there to begin to develop Spanish homilies and to practice speaking Spanish and the pronunciation of things. In a parish that I was at, the pastor connected with a local deacon that was at one of the neighboring parishes who came and preached at the Sunday Masses until Spanish Sunday Masses, until he was able to find someone who was Spanish speaking to come to the parish. So consider all those things. The other part is when it comes to translations, you know, that you should have someone who is willing in the parish to, if you don't have a Spanish-speaking staff member, something you want to consider, someone who is able to be available for when those questions come to the parish, someone who can answer the phone in Spanish and can help you with translations. For instance, if you want to place something in the bulletin, and it should be done by someone who's proficient in Spanish, and ensuring that you use correct grammar, but also the best word selection, something that I would call, you know, neutral Spanish. I've got funny stories about people who use words that aren't familiar to most of the parish because they were from Colombia or from other places, and the word seemed odd or the wrong context, so be aware of that. The other thing is that Hispanic communities, like I mentioned earlier, are very young, and so if you, there was a priest friend of mine, or a bishop I think it was, who said Hispanic ministry equals youth and young adult ministry. So keep that in mind. You'll want to know, how can we engage young people who for the most part are going to be Spanish speaking and English speaking or bilingual, and maybe even more comfortable in English. How do you engage them into your youth ministry processes and catechesis? And there'll be young adults who are perhaps more comfortable in Spanish, who will want to gather or be used to gathering, and you'll want to attend to that as well. Young families with children especially, something to consider. The other part that I think will be important to understand is that there are high numbers of renewalist groups within the Catholic Church. Charismatic Renewal has a lot of influence throughout Latin America, but also in the U.S. And renewalist doesn't necessarily mean that you're connected to the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, but it means that you appreciate or you connect with the experience of that spirituality, which might include, you know, more lively celebrations of the liturgy. It might include, you know, being familiar with the language or experience of that is common to the Charismatic Renewal. It might mean that you are more comfortable with healing and praying in tongues. That's more connected with the Charismatic Renewal. So that's something to take note of. The Pew estimates that about 50% of all Hispanic Catholics in the U.S. are Charismatic Renewalists. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily connected to Charismatic prayer groups, but they're familiar and comfortable in that environment. Josman Ospino, in his study through Boston College, Hispanic Ministry in Catholic Parishes, if you're not familiar with it, I recommend that as something to look at as a resource for being formed while you develop this Hispanic ministry at your parish. That 50% of the more than 4,300 parishes that they surveyed have a Catholic Charismatic Renewal group, and I'm assuming here it's a prayer group in their parish. So that's something to be taken account of. Here is a recent article by Josman Ospino. This is a quote that I think is going to be very important just for you to understand the impact of the renewalists or the Catholic Charismatic Renewal among the Hispanics in the U.S. The Catholic Charismatic Renewal is the most influential spiritual movement among Hispanic Catholics in our country. When present, it constitutes the largest group in a parish. It is demonstrably one of the spiritualities most successful in fostering vocations to leadership and service in the church throughout the U.S. I think that's important, something important to pay attention to, and to nurture and to guide and accompany. So just be aware of that, and maybe you might want to ask again a neighboring parish that already has a Hispanic ministry, how is that working for them? And I know a lot of people, a lot of Catholic leaders that have come through, just exactly like Josman Ospino here mentions, have come through the Charismatic Renewal, whether they go on to become priests or deacons. So something to seriously consider. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to submit them, type them on the side there in that little box that we have there. So a little more about ministries that you might want to develop. Obviously there's liturgical ministries. If you're going to have a mass and you're going to have to, pick the right people and have some kind of formation for them. Again, check with your liturgy office, check with the Hispanic Ministry office, and how can we help develop our liturgical ministers. find the musicians. Initially it might be, your own music director who might not know Spanish, but there's resources out there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Catechetical ministries, you'll need to have a way to include the children into not only the sacramental preparation programs, but even for Eucharist or penance and confirmation and such, but also how do you develop, form the parents and sponsors for the baptism. And some of these will need to be in Spanish, and some of them you can do bilingually, some of them you can do in English. But something to consider is that while my experience has been that while most of the children, elementary school children, will speak Spanish, their comprehension level, because they go to school in English, mostly in English, then their comprehension level of the material might be higher in English. But it's important to include the parents, and so they'll want to consider perhaps having bilingual catechetical resources. And there are many publishers out there who do publish materials bilingually, and they'll be very helpful. They have websites that help the parents maneuver through this, and you'll find webinars as well on there, and videos on their websites as well. So something to consider. There's many catechetical publishers. I don't want to name or single anybody out, but please feel free to ask the questions, and we can send those to you later, those links and recommendations. As well as sacramental preparation materials are out there as well. And the other part is social ministries. There are many ways in which you will want to ensure that your parish is aware of the needs that there are in your community, particularly for those who are maybe Hispanic and beyond. But especially if you want to foster leadership in that regard, I find that people are very willing to assist. In the parish where I assist now, a lot of our Hispanic community works hand in hand with the soup kitchen that we have there, and makes meals once a week, for the homeless population and the people in need. And so there you'll find people are willing to offer and connect in that regard, to offer their services and their time. So connect with your local Catholic charities and your CRS representative in the diocese, and other parishes that you might be able to connect with, and services that the diocese provides, but also other parishes provide. And I can't say it enough, you'll want to engage youth and young adult in ministries of the parish that you currently have. What do you have available? How does your youth minister or young adult minister, how do they understand how to serve these populations? Recently had a conversation with actually this morning with the folks at NFCYM, and we talked about how they're trying to better be equipped to help youth and young adult ministers serve Hispanic populations and other populations in their diocese and in parishes. So something to connect with. Go to their website as well. Also, you might consider La Red de Pastoral Juvenil Hispana. I can certainly provide these for you later, but they work specifically in training ministers and youth and young adults that serve Hispanics. And there's other organizations that do that as well. Consider those. Something else to look at. Again, we don't have very much time, but these are just some, hopefully, ideas that will spur some more conversation for you and even questions for you. And so we have just a little bit more time. We won't take too much time, but this is something important, especially when you're talking about celebration of Mass and other prayer moments and devotions, is the liturgical year, devotions and planning. And these are just some things to ponder. They're not they're generalities perhaps, they're not all the time kinds of things that you can take as gospel, but just based on my experience and other conversations that I have with people over the years. And while the liturgical year is the same the world over, and it seems that culturally, how people express or experience the liturgical year might have unique views or unique observations that present themselves. So for instance, Lent, we all know, is a penitential season, and it may appear to take on a more serious note, a uniquely serious note among the Latino communities and than the mainstream culture. One of the things is that, and this is I heard from a theologian somewhere, I don't remember who it was, but basically said, you know, Latinos are a Good Friday people, and while the prevailing culture is an Easter people. And just what that he meant to say is that, you know, we as Latinos are more connected somehow to the suffering Christ, while perhaps, and the experiences that flow from that, and perhaps the prevailing culture is more connected to the risen Christ. And I think what he was getting at is we need to kind of find a balance for all of us as a parish. How do we be a people who embrace the whole of the Paschal mystery? But so you'll find if you have a Spanish Mass, or if you begin a Spanish Mass and you have Latinos in your community, Ash Wednesday is going to be huge. Palm Sunday and Good Friday, and to the point that it might appear, like I said, more important than Easter Sunday. And some of it has to do with which we'll talk a bit later about. It's going to affect your scheduling. What time do you have the Spanish Mass? What time do you have, even for that matter, Masses in any other language? Advent, in some cases, may appear to be almost non-existent, just because of the way that people celebrate these devotions and spirituality is expressed. So, you know, in Advent, we have the feast of the patroness of the U.S., which is the Immaculate Conception. We have the Feast of the Immaculate Conception on December 8th, and a lot of Latino communities from their countries of origin have December the 8th as their patroness as well, Nicaragua being one of them. And I'm sure there's others which I don't remember at the moment. But then a few days after that, you have the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is huge. I'll say it again, huge. And so these are big celebrations, and you'd think, you know, it's more important than Christmas sometimes. Again, we have to understand the context in which it's experienced, and it's an Advent feast. You'll have to have conversations about how that is becomes the norm in your parish. What do you celebrate? And also, you know, you have in Advent, you begin the Christmas novena, which in many communities, specifically Mexican ones, are posadas, but there are also other communities that have those 9 days before Christmas that they celebrate uniquely so. And so, you know, I'm familiar with Simbangabi in the Filipino communities, and they start singing Christmas songs, and there's a kind of a tension with that. Same thing happens with the posadas, you know, there's a tension with that. So be aware of those things, and then especially when you begin to celebrate or plan celebration of Christmas itself, in my experience, Christmas Mass during the day isn't a big occasion where people come. They'd much rather come on Christmas Eve, you know, Noche Buena, or a midnight Mass. And so consider that, you know, maybe it's something that you want to address when you begin planning the liturgical calendar at your parish. The other thing to consider is, you know, we talked about novenas. For those of you who celebrate or will celebrate Our Lady of Guadalupe, there's a novena before that celebration. Other Marian feasts, people have 9 days of gatherings, usually in homes, but it can happen at the parish as well. So be aware that these are moments to not only include the Hispanic community, but other, you know, the prevailing culture, but other communities within your parish, I mean, Our Lady of Guadalupe is also the patroness of the Philippines, so something to consider. Yeah, how do you bring people together? And I think in the end, what any parish wants to do is not to create parallel communities, but to join and have celebrations in common. And I think we can develop that as we go along. So keep that in mind and begin having those conversations early on as you begin to plan these things. You'll also want to look at the Stations of the Cross. Again, a very important spirituality during Lent for the whole of the church, but uniquely so for Latino communities. Something that I've experienced in most of the places that I have been at that have Hispanic ministry is the live Stations of the Cross on Good Friday. Now, you'll have the liturgical service on Good Friday, liturgical liturgy, but there, in the afternoon, people want to have a live Stations of the Cross. I found that this is a great way to unite the whole parish and be able to experience this devotion in a unique way. And also, you'll want to consider, Quinceaños, the moment you begin to have Spanish Mass. Excuse me. Little tea for me. You'll find that people will come and say, do you do Quinceaños, celebration of Quinceañeras? And this is a unique celebration, a Mass of Thanksgiving or Liturgy of the Word, and the families that come to thank God for the young women in their family reaching 15 years. And I find that it's an occasion to invite young women, or young men for that matter, into making it a commitment to the parish, not only to the church and to the Blessed Mother and to Christ, but also to the parish. How am I going to serve the parish now that I'm 15 years old? So look at that. The USCCB has a publication that's directly related to the celebration of Quinceaños, 15 years, and with an official rite now that'll be in the new Book of Blessings, but it's a blessing, and it gives a context for the importance of celebrating this. You'll want to take a look at that. The other thing that you might consider, because it'll come up more often than not, is a presentación, which is a presentation of babies, either at 3 days or at 3 months. And some people will even say at 3 years. So 3 is a significant number, obviously. But these are related to purification rituals of the Hebrew people. And you'll find scripturally the presentation at the temple. And so there are specific blessings that people use. There are resources out there. You'll want to consider those. There's some excellent books that actually go through all these rites. One of them from LTP, written by the late Miguel Arias, and the name escapes me now, but it'll come to me, I'm sure. The name of the priest, good friend of mine. Obviously not a good friend if I can't remember his name, but I'm embarrassed. Okay, so and also sacraments and sacramental preparation. The baptism. Baptisms. How are you going to prepare for baptisms? You'll notice, no doubt, once you begin Hispanic ministry, that your baptisms will increase incredibly from what your norm is. Again, related to, Latinos tend to have more babies or larger families than the norm. And also for First Communion, you'll have that'll grow. You'll notice that confirmations, the faces in the crowd will be more Latino than normal. So pay attention to those things, and how do we nurture that? How do we provide for the family's experiences of these, that they might be positive ones? For First Communion, for instance, Latinos have this custom of bringing candles, baptismal candles, to make the connection to that initiation as children. And some of them will wear little red ribbons on their shirts or dresses, and it's a big to-do. So pay attention to that and be sensitive to that. The other thing is funerals. Again, there are, I'll call them expectations. So ask the people what is it that you experience. Make sure that you have these connected to the parish custom and parish experiences. You'll want to ensure that the music ministry folks that are there, particularly if there's no other music available, that they learn some repertoire to be able to use at the funerals. There's many resources, as I mentioned, and I want to just remind you, if you're not aware of it, that for the first time now in the U.S., we have an official Misal Romano, an official Roman Missal in the Spanish language, which you're able to use now just a few weeks ago in Pentecost, but it'll be mandatory in the first Sunday of Advent in December. So you'll want to ensure that you get that. I think its Catholic Book has a version, as well as Liturgical Press has a version. And it's a wonderful book because it has includes the prefaces and prayers for the individual the patronal feasts of various countries throughout Latin America, and it's wonderfully put together, and it looks a lot like the format that is used in the English Roman Missal that you'll be familiar with. So make sure you get one of those. The leccionario, the lectionary, there is not an official leccionario for use in the U.S., but in our publications, in today's Missal, Misal del Día, Unidos en Cristo, you'll find that the readings are those that were prescribed, taken from the leccionario from Mexico, and you'll also find that the USCCB has those on their website. But the psalm that is included in the USCCB on the website is the psalm that is from Mexico, which is not the one that we have been asked to publish, which is from the lectionary that we used to use in the past, Leccionario Hispanoamericano, which includes psalms from a translation, adaptation from Spain. So, but be assured that what we have here in our missals and our publications are the official ones that the bishops ask us to use. Also, Responde y Aclama, which some of you who are familiar with Respond and Acclaim, is very similar in format, that you can use a psalm to be sung every Sunday. And of course, some of you may be familiar with Floricanto, which has a great repertoire for accompanying the parish's prayer life and devotions, but especially the liturgies at your parish. So you'll want to look at that. Liturgia y Canción, which is a bilingual publication, has great articles, but also has song selections for every Sunday, solemnity, and feast day that's important to the life of the church in the U.S. Some of the things that you were considering, that you may consider, is to look at some publications from the USCCB. One in particular is Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers. And if you go to the website, you'll be able to find it. And there's an accompanying publication that's called Best Practices, again, for cultural, intercultural ministry or multicultural ministry. And you'll find in there some great stories about how pastors went about it in different parishes of developing not only their Hispanic ministry, but ministries in general with the whole of the parish, with the aim to develop a multicultural spirituality, which I really recommend as something to look forward to. It's not just about serving the Hispanic community in isolation, but certainly welcoming, but getting to the point of where this community feels that they belong and have ownership of the parish. You'll also want to look at that whole question of stewardship for the whole of the parish and how you can uniquely so involve the Hispanic community. We're about out of time, and so I want to thank you for your taking the time to listen to me speak, and hopefully you found some tidbits of information that you can use. And now is the time for questions and answers, and it looks like many of you have provided these for us. And so I'm going to invite my friend here, Jethro, to read these questions for me, and I will answer as best as I can.
Great, thanks, Pedro. We do have some great questions. A lot of them are focused on a little more detail on some of the things that you already mentioned. So we'll dive right in. This person is looking for suggestions, specific suggestions on how to implement the new translation of the Missal Romano.
One of the things I'm going to recommend, if in your diocese or your region you see that you have, excuse me, the FDLC is sponsoring workshops. So first thing I would recommend is see if you have those in your area, and you can go to the FDLC website, and I think even the USCCB has it on the website. You'll find dates, places, and times where these are taking place. The other thing is I would recommend that you contact your office of worship in the diocese and see if they are doing anything in particular in their diocese to address the introducing the Missal Romano. The one thing that I did at my parish is, and mainly because I was very well connected to the development of the chants and adaptation of the chants in the Missal Romano, and so I'm very familiar with this particular resource. It's wonderful. Is I actually took the time to do 2 sessions for all our liturgical ministers at the parish in Spanish. And I went through the general instruction of the Roman Missal and just basically the makeup of the book and so much so that several of the people at the forum said, "Can you order me one of these?" And they actually have them, and they're all excited about having these, so they're available. The other thing that I'm going to do as a result of that is actually give, and the pastor suggested I do this, a couple presentations. We haven't figured out exactly when, but it'll happen on Sundays for the whole of the community to be able to know that this is coming.
Great. And you mentioned about resources to help pastors to prepare their homilies in Spanish. Could you share a little more about that and how they might be able to get a hold of those?
Well, okay. Currently on what we have, liturgy.com, I don't know if I want to, so there are Spanish, so someone shook their head no, but some surprises come in the near future, just so you know. But liturgy.com currently has homily helps. I know that the University of St. Louis liturgy website has homilies that they post on there, and there are other ones too. So even if you just do a search for homilies in Spanish, you'll get some sites that constantly are updating those. So those are some of the ones that I have in mind currently. There's also a book by LTP that deals with the topic of preaching in Spanish.
Great. And a couple of our attendees are not as familiar with the concept of a Quinceanera. Could you go into a little more detail about that celebration?
Sure. So there are several ways that this might take, the origins of this. Some people claim that it is something that was practiced by some of the native peoples in Latin America, that it was a rite of passage, that when young women reached the age of 15, of childbearing age, but also they took on the role of helping the parents care for the children, helping the parents care for the elders. And so they took on a more pronounced responsibility. And other people say, well, you know, when the European evangelizers came to America, to the New World, that they began to take on these things and kind of elaborate on it, help Christianize it, as it were. So it's always been a very important rite of passage. And it wasn't until recently that it began to take on this importance with the celebration of Mass. I know in talking to some people from El Salvador, they call it the Te Deum. And basically, and I've since learned that it was on the road to go to the celebration, they would stop at the church and pray or sing the Te Deum, which is a hymn of praise. And the priest sometimes would come out and just give them a blessing and before they went on the party. It's gone into, developed into something that's more official now here, especially here in the U.S., where there is actually a blessing, a rite of blessing, which has recommended readings, recommended ritual for that to happen in Mass or outside of Mass. And so I recommend you going to the website, USCCB website, and getting that little pamphlet for you. It's going to be very helpful in understanding that.
So this parish is just starting out with a Hispanic ministry, and they want to know, is it better to begin with bilingual Mass or a Spanish Mass if you're just starting out with Spanish Masses and celebrations?
This is my personal opinion, based on experience, and having seen people begin with bilingual Masses, is that it doesn't appear to be too popular, because people are looking to begin or to enter into an experience with the risen Christ in Spanish, something that they're familiar with. Again, it's going to depend on your resources and talking to the parishioners that you're trying to serve. So I would recommend engaging, finding a core of leaders in the community and say, what is it that you think is going to make more sense? And because they're going to be your eyes and ears, and having those conversations with the people that are there. Obviously, there's resources for everyone, and the decision's going to really affect how you go on and develop other things beyond that. I know I've been to parishes where they have began with a bilingual Mass and then ended up shifting to the Spanish Mass and noticed the difference of attendance. So something to be said for that. I'm not saying that it's not, that you shouldn't go the bilingual route, and maybe at some point in time the Spanish Mass will go into the bilingual, but it's going to depend. Again, pay close attention to those things, ask the right people, ask the right questions, and I can't give you a definite on that. I'll just say my experience has shown me that it's better to start with the Spanish Mass first.
Great. Kind of a related question. This particular parish is wanting to embrace their multilingual communities of all kinds, and they would list out English, Spanish, Creole, Filipino, Vietnamese. From kind of a starting point, how would they go about that?
Good question. You know, you might want to, a couple of years ago, we did a series of webinars called Intercultural Liturgies, and I think there's 4 of them. You might want to go to our webpage and look under webinars, or even our YouTube channel, and you'll find them there. But just to answer it simply, I think it's important that, especially in our country, we have such a diversity and richness of cultures that form our parishes, and to have opportunities to be able to gather in prayer is going to be very important, and not just in prayer but also socially. And one of the things that I would recommend is not to put all the pressure on the Eucharist on Sunday or on special feasts, where you're only going to have maybe 3 or 4, a handful a year, and we have to get to the point where we feel comfortable praying together and singing together and developing a repertoire. So maybe it's starting small. Maybe it's on the Stations of the Cross during Lent. How do you concentrate on developing, a pattern for celebrating these? A rosary. Maybe it's the rosary. Maybe it's a Taizé prayer. Those things that you're going to have more of an opportunity to mold into what's going to serve you best.
So there's a couple of related questions. I'm going to try to tie them into one. It sounds like there's a lot of people interested in kind of helping to rally a team of people that are putting together this new effort in ministry. What are some of the primary things they should focus on to kind of rally that group of people together? You know, maybe like a mission statement, or kind of the first easy do's and don'ts of getting your feet wet with Hispanic ministry?
I think initially, because this is going to be very important for the parish, especially if some of the experiences I've had at parishes where it almost feels, people feel they're being intruded on, which is sad, but it's a reality. And so I would recommend that the pastoral council begin there and having this conversation, inviting someone to come be a part of that. Maybe they're not part of the parish, but from the bishop, from the diocesan offices, to say this is the reality in our communities. This is what we're seeing. Inviting a pastor from another parish that went through the experience. What worked, what didn't work, what would you recommend we do, what shouldn't we do, based on experience. But the other thing is I think there has to be honesty about how we welcome and work to allow for all parishioners to feel that they belong. That's going to be key. And so the Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers is a great resource for that, I mentioned earlier in the webinar. And the other part is that we need to ensure that we address racism, address prejudice, address discrimination. I mean, I've had interesting conversations with pastors that say, it's just all of a sudden it comes up, well, let them learn English, how long do we have the Spanish Mass before we can have all in? I mean, we're asking the wrong questions. We have to address those as they came up, so we have a healthy conversation about it, healthy dialogue, and then when we actually begin to form these leadership teams, that they not only include Spanish-speaking folks or Hispanics or bilingual folks. Important to have bilingual folks. They're going to be your border crossers, your bridge builders. But to ensure that the people on your parish staff are on board, the leadership of your parish is on board. Otherwise, you're going to butt up against some very critical challenges.
Right. This will be our last question because we are running near the end here. But in the same vein, people are interested to know, are there any unique things to consider when it comes to engaging young adults in the same question, the ways to rally them around this new effort?
Well, again, it's going to depend. I have found that young adults, and you'll have to, I'll make a distinction between, recent immigrants, 1.5 generation, which would be children that came to the U.S. As immigrants and now are, for all intents and purposes, bicultural. And then your second, third, and fourth generation. I think there's unique ways of looking at all of these. I find that young adults are much more honest and have less baggage than us as adults. I'm speaking for myself. And so I think entering into conversations with folks, I have yet to find young adults that don't want to create community, that don't want to network, that don't want to have friends who, like them, have faith as an important part of their life, but also have questions. And so, what are you doing with high school age youth? What are you doing with, junior high? But what are you doing within the young adults that are 18 and above? They may be married, they may have children, or that are single. And how do we create spaces for gathering these young adults and inviting them into leadership roles? That it's not just the older people that are going to be the lectors, or they're going to be the altar servers, or whatever. We have to include all of these different age groups. And one of the things that I find, particularly that's hopeful for me, is that in Hispanic ministry in general, there is still that notion of intergenerational experiences. So when you have gatherings, you're going to have all the different age groups that are present. And one of the criticisms that I have for the way that we've thought about ministry, youth ministry over the years, because I was involved in this for many years, is that we tend to separate the youth from the adults, but we have to have experiences where families get together. Not all the time necessarily, but we have to have that. We can't be the youth over here and the adults over here all the time. And so that's something that's refreshing in Hispanic ministry, is that you have more of these experiences that are intergenerational.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have questions for. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. We do thank you for joining us. Again, if you have any additional questions, you can contact us at 1-888-260-7206, or you can email us at productspecialists@ocp.org with any of your additional questions. And also, Pedro has graciously offered to answer our questions. So anything that we didn't get to during the webinar, Pedro will be able to answer after the webinar. You'll also be able to see a recording and slides of this webinar probably up tomorrow at /webinars, ocp.org/webinars. And please do stick around and answer the survey afterwards so we can make sure to give you great content in the future as well.
And one last thing I forgot, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it, but for those of you who are interested in having maybe some training at your parish for developing your liturgical ministers, we do have provide opportunities through our OCP Instituto here. Just send us a note at outreach@ocp.org, and we'll be happy to return your call and talk to you about some of those opportunities for learning. Thank you.